Yeah, hi. We are from Arizona Info Solutions Private Limited. Today we are going to view about we are developing through Unity. Thank you.
3. Developing VR in Unity VR and Labbed Kindy Exchange, 2015, Oculus Rift and Leap Motion. Develop in Unity Run Sirger.itch.io Web link www.youtube.com Web link. 4. Developing VR in Unity VR and Labbed Kindy Combat Leap, 2016, Oculus Rift. Develop in Unreal Engine www.youtube.com Web link. 5. Developing VR in Unity VR and Labbed Kindy 99 Names, 2015, Web VR. Developed in JS with 3JS 99 names.adidio.net. 6. Developing VR in Unity VR and Labbed Kindy Mixed Reality Experiment Google Cardboard developed in Unity with Vuforia SDK www.adidio.net Web link. 7. Developing VR in Unity What I'll Talk VR Tech Overview Desktop VR versus Mobile VR in Unity Interaction and VR towards better VR experience Future Prediction. 8. Now is the time to start making something in VR, even if you don't plan on launching it. It is a really good idea to start experimenting and see what you can learn. Even if you're not going to launch something, it is good to have experience in virtual reality so that if it makes sense for you to get into it, you're able to. Palmer Luckey, co-founder of Oculus, developing VR in Unity. 9. Developing VR in Unity VR Tech Overview VR is a tech that creates new perception of reality in the mind of its users achieved through the use of HMD, head-mounted display, that tricks its user into thinking he or she is in a different place closely related to R, but not similar nor has hierarchical relation. 10. Developing VR in Unity VR Tech Overview. 11. Developing VR in Unity VR Tech Overview 1. Lens emulating depth via focal point adjustment 2. Display stereo rendering 5 emulates real-life view 3. Tracking technology tracking head movement uses gyro and accelerometer and smartphone 4. 3D audio immersive 3D audio. 12. Developing VR in Unity current VR platforms PC Android console Oculus Rift HTC Vive Google VR, Cardboard and Daydream, Samsung Gear VR PS VR OS VR. 13. Developing VR in Unity Desktop VR versus Mobile VR. From the tech side, desktop VR requires more horsepower, but has potential for many kind of interaction and contents. Mobile VR experience is hampered by the device's spec. Desktop VR can do positional tracking. Mobile VR can only do head positional tracking. Batteries versus cable both do VR content rendering in roughly the same way. 14. Developing VR in Unity Desktop VR versus Mobile VR. From the business side, mobile VR has lower entry barrier, mid-high, and Android phone is sufficient. Desktop VR requires high-end gaming rig. Mobile VR has way larger potential market than desktop. Desktop VR will interest hardcore gamer. Mobile VR will interest budget-oriented gadget enthusiasts. 15. Developing VR in Unity Desktop VR versus Mobile VR. Mobile VR will help promoting VR to the masses. Desktop VR will help pushing the boundaries. Tech-wise, both is ready for mass development now. 16. Developing VR in Unity. Why develop VR now? Relatively new tech, still no best practice sets in stone. Experiments are highly appreciated. Big or small developers, everybody are still finding its feet. You can make the difference. 17. Developing VR in Unity. VR in Unity PC Oculus Rift HTC Vive OS V or Oculus Rift DK2 CV1 Win 7 plus Unity 5.x. 18. Developing VR in Unity. VR in Unity PC Oculus Rift HTC Vive OS VR HTC Vive Win 7 Plus Unity 5.x 19. Developing VR in Unity. VR in Unity PC Oculus Rift HTC Vive OS VR OS VR HMD Win 7 Plus Unity 5.x 20. Developing VR in Unity. VR in Unity Android Google VR, Cardboard and Daydream, Samsung Gear VR Android VR HMD Android 5.1 Plus Unity 5.x Google Cardboard SDK Nexus 6, Daydream. 21. Developing VR in Unity. VR in Unity Android Google VR, Cardboard and Daydream, Samsung Gear VR Android VR HMD Android 5.1 Plus Unity 5.x Vaporia SDK. 22. Developing VR in Unity. VR in Unity Android Google VR, Cardboard and Daydream, Samsung Gear VR Android 5.1 Plus Unity 5.x Samsung Galaxy S7 Samsung Gear VR. 23. Developing VR in Unity. VR in Unity, General Architecture Default Camera is replaced by Vendor-Specific VR Camera, usually comes as prefab. VR Camera will render the game scene to be VR ready. Other game objects are used as usual game scene VR Camera other game objects. 24. Developing VR in Unity. VR in Unity, tips for the first timer. Most of the time, you'll wrestle with setting up specific environment. Oculus, get the latest SDK and fulfill the requirements. Use Rift DK2 at least. Don't use laptop Android. Set up Android SDK properly. Google and Vaporia SDKs are generally easy to set up. 25. Developing VR in Unity. VR in Unity after replacing the main camera object with a vendor-specific R camera prefab, you're done. Easy? Demo. 26. What else to do? If getting VR to up and run is easy, then 27. Let's talk about interaction. 28. Developing VR in Unity. Interaction in VR with headset strapped on. It's hard to look around. Mouse plus keyboard won't be the best way to interact. 29. Developing VR in Unity. Interaction in VR. Look around. Gamepad interaction. Gaze interaction. Natural interaction. Available now. Oculus Touch Vive Controller. Google Daydream Leap Motion Experimental Interaction, DIY, Voice Controller. Custom Electronic, Arduino/RPI/etc. Easy to develop, minimal interaction. Harder to develop, rich interaction. 30. Developing VR in Unity. Interaction in VR. Look around. The most basic thing you can do inside VR. Replacing traditional FPS camera, controlled by mouse, with your head results in a natural, immersive experience used in many VR videos. Minimum interaction, but can still produces excellent experience. 31. Developing VR in Unity. 360 photos/videos in Unity. Generally speaking, here are the steps. Obtain 360 photo, video. Make a skybox using sphere, cube. Use the photo, video as the texture for the skybox. 32. Developing VR in Unity. 360 photos/videos in Unity. 33. Developing VR in Unity. 360 photos/videos in Unity. Plugin, Easy Movie Texture, www.assetstore.unity3d.com. Web link content/10032, discussions, burnirol.com. Web link forum.unity3d.com. Web link video on asphere.3765522/talesfromtherift.com. Web link skybox/ 34. Developing VR in Unity. Gaze interaction using eye as an input. Activating an object by looking at it for a certain period. Optional. Use gaze reticle to help user find its views cross. 35. Developing VR in Unity. Gaze interaction. 36. Developing VR and Unity Gaze Interaction. Google Cardboard SDK. Use GV or Gaze script. Drag the script from assets. Google VR/scripts/UI/GV or Gaze onto the camera. Implement IGV Gaze pointer and IGV Gaze responder to the interactive object. Vuforia SDK uses Google's Gaze. 37. Developing VR and Unity Natural Interaction with Leap Motion. Leap Motion offers the ability to track hand gestures. It can be sticked in front of Oculus Vive to enable user to see her hands, thus enables a natural interaction using hands while inside VR. 38. Developing VR and Unity Natural Interaction with Leap Motion. 39. Developing VR with Unity Natural Interaction with Leap Motion. Download and import the Leap Motion core assets Unity package. Use LP over Plura controller prefab from the Leap Motion plus OV or directory as the main VR camera. The hand will be added to the screen and acts as a 3D objects, just like the others, with colliders too. 40. Developing VR and Unity Experimental Interaction. Voice control. Use voice to give input to the VR world closely tied to the deployment platform iOS, Android, Windows, Mac. Has its own voice recognition system. Unity 5.4 can natively do voice recognition in Windows. Developer.microsoft.com web link holographics/voice_input_and_Unity. 41. Developing VR and Unity Experimental Interaction. Voice control. Unity only solution. IcePicket. Guytha.com web link word detection. www.assetstore.unity3d.com web link content/4518 Unity plus other. Read serial and Unity do voice recognition and other using Python, Node.js, etc. and send serial from there. 42. Developing VR and Unity Experimental Interaction. Custom electronic. If you have something different, why not make it yourself? Use Arduino, Raspberry Pi, etc. to read from certain sensor and send its data to Unity. Vital to create haptic feedback and experimenting with different kinds of interaction make one-of-a-kind immersive experience. 43. Developing VR and Unity Experimental Interaction. Custom electronic. 44. Developing VR and Unity Experimental Interaction. Custom electronic. Use Unity to receive serial data. Android and microcontroller. Bluetooth. https://www.assetstore.unity3d.com web link simple serial port. www.assetstore.unity3d.com web link content/53594 attach sensors to Arduino, Raspberry Pi, other send data via serial, Bluetooth. Watch out for latency. 45. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience, removing simulation sickness. Simulation sickness is VR's biggest enemy cause. Brain is tricked to feel movement, while static. When that trick is broken, nausea attacks, users opt out from the experience, and probably won't come back. 46. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience, removing simulation sickness. Technical causes, latency. Maximum should be 20 ms. Many research has gone into how to solve this issue. Many solutions, but none has quite hits the mark. 47. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience, removing simulation sickness. Hardware design solution, more comfortable lens. More comfortable HMD when strapped on. 48. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience, removing simulation sickness. Content design, adding nose and feet shows a fixed reference point in a frame. 49. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience, removing simulation sickness. Game design, movement. In-game movement have more latency potential and standing still. Objects are continuously and dynamically rendered in real time. More processing power to move around. Use teleport. Teleport can be done with gaze interaction, No controller is required. 50. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. Removing simulation sickness. Keep talking and nobody explodes. www.keeptalkingaim.com. 51. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. Removing simulation sickness. Game design. Movement. To move around, use teleport. Use predetermined route. Teleport can be done with gaze interaction. No controller is required. Predetermined route will ease us in optimizing assets. Don't add unnecessary vertical movement. 52. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. Removing simulation sickness. Teleport. Developer.oculus.com web link. Oculus sample framework for Unity 5/InMind VR. Developer.oculus.com web link. Oculus sample framework for Unity 5/. 53. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. Removing simulation sickness. Game design. Camera view. It's natural to have first-person view, but it's easier to result in simulation sickness. To reduce that, use third-person view. It will still have good experience. 54. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. Removing simulation sickness. Chronos. www.chronosopher.com. Colosopher.tumblr.com. 55. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. Removing simulation sickness. Tech tips. Use low poly objects with high res textures to compensate. Tone shading is okay. Photorealistic can probably causes latency. 56. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. Removing simulation sickness. Job Simulator. www.jobsimulatorgame.com. Lands End. www.landsendgame.com. 57. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. Removing simulation sickness. Tech tips. Use as many static objects as possible. Use least RAM. Use LOD, culling and batching to prevent rendering too many objects at the same time. Use as many baked lighting as possible. Unity3D.com web link. Optimization VR Unity. 58. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. Removing simulation sickness. 59. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. Experience design. Design experience from the ground up. Don't just adapt already available 3D game to VR. VR is now best experienced in short but meaningful time, 5-20 minutes. Design focal point, because the user can look into any direction. 60. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. UI design. Make sure the user can see the UI at any time. Go for no UI style. Embed the required information in the objects. Just like in normal life, enable the player to look around, even when in pause mode. 61. Developing VR and Unity towards better VR experience. 62. Developing VR and Unity future prediction. Lower cost of desktop VR, web VR, VR beyond entertainment. 63. At the same time, I'd say developers should be realistic. Don't believe the most optimistic things the analysts say. Especially when those analysts don't actually know anything about VR. IT is going to take time for virtual reality to become truly mass market and successful, so people should scale their efforts appropriately. Palmer Luckey, co-founder of Oculus, developing VR and Unity.